Welcome everybody back to the channel. It's Morphing Jars, and today I'm going to bring you an interesting deck that is not exactly new, Earth Machine, but using some new cards from Power of the Elements, namely the Vernusylph cards, which are a series of fairy earth monsters. This deck will get a nice boost and it'll become, I guess, sort of the control deck that it's always wanted to be, but has been sort of lackluster before. So yeah, without further ado, let me get into the Vernusylph cards so I can run them down for you. Okay, so before we get into the deck profile, I'm going to be running down the Vernusylph cards in case you haven't seen them before. So these were all released, the currently existing cards, in Power of the Elements just a couple weeks ago. And they're, as I said, all Earth Fairies. Their levels vary, and their attacks and defense vary, but they all have one shared effect, which is that from the hand, you can discard that Vernusylph card and one monster or Vernusylph card, think spell or trap, and then they each have a unique effect, and then they also special summon an earth monster from your graveyard. One of them has a stipulation on that, but the rest of them don't. And then finally, all of the Vernusylph's hand effects lock you out of special or activating non-earth monster effects for the rest of the turn, which is definitely worth worrying about. So the first one we'll talk about here is Vernusylph of the Awakening Forest. This is a level 4. This one, when it's discarded, along with another monster or Vernusylph card, lets you Foolish Burial an earth monster that can be normal summoned or set. And then it lets you special summon a monster from the graveyard with a different name from that monster that you sent. So that's the only one of these that stipulates what kind of earth monster. It just can't be the one that you sent, which is good because then you could, for example, just pitch it and another monster, Foolish Burial, a Therion King Regulus, and special summon the Therion King Regulus, which would just be an insane setup for pretty much any deck. You could just play like a one-card Omni Negate engine in pretty much any deck. Any earth deck, certainly. The next is Vernusylph of the Flowering Fields, which we actually will not be using in our profile today just because it's a little situational. This one lets you discard this card and one monster or one Vernusylph card to add an earth monster from your graveyard and then special summon it, which in Earth Machine isn't so useful because usually you want your cards in the graveyard, right? The other thing, so these all have another additional effect, like when they're on the field. So the Vernusylph of the Awakening Forest lets you target a Vernusylph monster you control and then its attack becomes doubled. The Flourishing, or the Flower Field, lets you, this one doesn't have an activated effect on field. It makes it so your opponent can't target Vernusylph monsters you control with card effects. The next Vernusylph is Vernusylph of the Thawing Mountains. This one lets you discard it and then draw a card, and then special summon an earth from your graveyard, which is really good. This card is the main reason that I'm not playing Prosperity in this deck, is that it conflicts with this card, and this card is very good. And you have to be able to draw a card to even be able to use it, so it kind of makes Prosperity makes these 3 cards dead. And then on field, this one can target a Vernusylph to double to make it so it can do a second attack during the battle phase. So with this card and Awakening of the Forest, you can get like a Therion King Regulus to do 10,000, 200 damage. But obviously that's sort of a niche, needing to be able to open enough Vernusylph names to be able to do it. The way you do that is by using some of the spell traps, which I'll get to in just a second. So then the final monster that we have so far, there's 2 more coming in the next set, is the Vernusylph of the Flourishing Hills. This is the ultra rare for the set, right? For the archetype. This one lets you discard it and another monster or Vernusylph card to add any Vernusylph cards. So this searches the spell traps, in addition to the monsters if you need those 2. And then when this is on field, Vernusylph monsters can't be assured by card effects, which is sometimes useful. So the spell traps that this card can search are Vernusylph Corolla, which is a continuous spell which lets you treat all earth monsters you control as Vernusylphs, which is useful because then it provides the targeting of protection from Flowering Fields and the destruction protection from Flourishing Hills. And then additionally, once per turn, if you would discard a Vernusylph monster to activate its effect, and then you would additionally have to discard another card, right? Instead of having to discard that other card, you can discard just the Vernusylph monster, which is nice. I mean, it makes it break even, but then you have to use the Vernusylph Corolla, so this card isn't super useful, and eventually I did cut it from my list. Vernusylph in the Changing Season, which lets you target a Vernusylph monster in your graveyard and then add it to your hand or special summon it, and then during your opponent's turn, except the turn the card was sent to the graveyard. If you have no cards in hand, you can banish this and special summon as many Vernusylphs as possible with different names from your graveyard, and then return them to hand, which is good. I don't know if I love this card in a pure Vernusylph build, and I definitely don't like it in an Earth Machine build. And then finally, the reason I think to play the archetype, well, the Vernusylph cards are very good by themselves, but this is definitely a reason to play it, is Vernusylph and the Flower Buds. Target face-up cards your opponent controls up to the number of Earth monsters you control with different names that were special summoned from the graveyard. Return Earth monsters you control to the hand equal to the number of targets, and if you returned at least one of those targets, your cards, or sorry, not your targets, one of your Earth monsters to hand, you return that targeted card to the hand. So you could bounce like 3 or 4. I think in one of the videos I end up having like a bounce 4 setup, which is just insane. So yeah, so that's the Vernusylph cards. They're all very good for Earth archetypes. In the future, we'll be getting one that adds a Vernusylph monster, or just an Earth Fairy monster rather, so that's going to be good for Eldlich. We get one that's more of a boss monster, the Vernusylph Goddess, and then we also get a field spell later on. All of these are very good, interesting cards, but for now, we're going to play a smallish engine and Earth machine. So I will pass you over to the deck profile so that you can see how I'm building this list. Okay, here with the deck list now. So as you can see, we are playing a relatively small Vernusylph package in this list. I've already explained them, but when we get to them in the deck list, I'll go through them shortly. So first we have 3 Machina Gear Frame. I really like this as a starter as opposed to Machina Metal Cruncher, which before the unlimiting of skill drain from 1 to 3 was pretty much sacrilege. Earth Machine decks were really combo heavy and never played Gear Frame. They played Metal Cruncher instead. I actually really like Gear Frame in this list because it lets you use Unclasper, which is a free Foolish Burial, to make a rank 4 in Gear Gigant X. And then it also lets you, it like gives you something to normal summon with Vernusylphs if you have like another line that involves something to track Harvester. So it is good. It gets you a lot of advantage, and it's just a very targeted specific card. And this is actually one of the biggest ways that the Vernusylph card engine helps the deck, and I'll explain that when we get a little further down, when we get to some of the videos. So then we have Fortress. I'm playing 2 copies here just because I like having 2. I like being able to draw into it off of the Tunneler. I like being able to send one and still have one in deck. I like opening with Fortress. I think it's a very good extender. Then 1 Citadel. You really only need 1. You can even get it back from the banish zone if it gets banished by using Ruin Force. Or Overdrive. So I really like this card at 1. And I think that's pretty typical. I don't think this card is ever at more than 1. 1 Ruin Force and 1 Unclasper. This is probably one of the more nuanced parts of the deck. Not these cards, but when to use them and when to not use them. Because as Ruin Force is such a powerful card, and Unclasper has such a powerful effect, being able to special summon itself and then also Foolish Burial monster, it seems like it would be something good to tunnel in on, and people will, or at least when I first started playing, I had a tendency to. But I think the Ruin Force is a very powerful tool, but it's just that, a tool. It's not the main plan of the deck. Then we have 3 Infinitrack Harvester, so that's all the Machina monsters, and we have 3 Infinitrack Harvester. Of course, this just adds a Infinitrack monster from deck to hand. The secondary effect, which is to target another machine monster, and then both of those monsters' levels become the combined levels of the 2. So for example, if you target Fortress, which is a 7, they'll both become 9s, which then lets you overlay into an Enter Blathnir. It's good, but it's hard to use in the Vernusylph version because usually by the time you get that effect, you will have already used a Vernusylph effect, which locks you out of using anything but Earth effects. So, good situationally. Trencher, Brutal Dozer, and Tunneler are a level 5 lineup. Obviously, these are all ostensibly quote-unquote bricks, but you can always pitch them to the graveyard. Brutal Dozer is probably the least useful of the 3 for anything except the combo. Usually the combo is Harvester, add Brutal Dozer, Tribute Harvester, to then special summon a Tunneler from deck and then go into a River Stormer. And it's not bad, but it's just the fact that it has to be special summoned from hand to be able to use its effects, so you can't, for example, pitch it off of a Vernusylph and then bring it back and then trigger it. That would be really good. So I'm playing it at 1. Also, there's no need to play it at 3 because you're not playing Metal Cruncher. Ancient Gear Box. Box isn't that bad to open either because you can usually just shuffle it back. I mean, it's obviously a hard brick in that it kills your Ancient Gear Ballista combo, but it's not too bad. This is usually, you add this and then you usually add Tunneler. So the 2 targets for Box in the deck are Tunneler and Trencher. Just 2 trains here, so we've got Crane and Bullet Train, and so Crane is like a secondary target. It's nice to open sometimes just because it helps with your extender, because you do usually need 1 extender, which can be Trencher in the grave, but you don't, it would be ideal to not use Trencher in the grave, because 1, you can just shuffle it back off of Tunneler if you need to, or you can save that for later to have another follow-up play. So it's nice to have Crane, and obviously Bullet Train is good for getting the engine, the recursive engine going, but I would say it's not as you'll see in the videos, it's not vital. But yeah, both of these are very good. Machine redeployment at 3 and overdrive at 1. Redeployment is an amazing card, but it almost always gets ashed. So we still play it at 3. I mean, I would just say when you're playing this card, try and pitch something that you wouldn't mind losing, like that isn't big of a downside, like a Fortress or a Ruin Force or a Tunneler or a Trench or something like that. Overdrive, really good card. Only at 1 because usually you get the Citadel and the Fortress into the grave somehow, or the Ruin Force into the grave somehow, and so then Overdrive is kind of dead. It doesn't do anything because we don't have a Metal Cruncher to summon off of Overdrive, though it might be worth playing a Metal Cruncher just for that exact purpose, to be able to summon off of Overdrive. But it's just kind of bricky, and I feel like it's not worth it. So just 1 Overdrive, mainly to be added off of redeployment. Heavy Forward at 3. I like this because having access to Harvester in addition to another normal summon is good for the combos with the Vernusylph, because you can save Gear Frame from your normal summon, and you can start your turn by doing a Vernusylph effect, pitching the Vernusylph monster and the Infinitrack Harvester, bringing back the Harvester off the Vernusylph effect, and then also getting the plus off of the Vernusylph to then trigger the Harvester, because this triggers on normal or special summon. Unfortunately, this only triggers on normal summon. Metal Cruncher triggers on special summon. So if we were playing a larger Vernusylph package, it might be worth playing Metal Cruncher. I don't know. It just, because playing Metal Cruncher also necessitates that you play more of each of these names so you can get the one you want. But yeah, I acquiesce. And then I guess like I acquiesce to playing this instead of going for the high roll Metal Crunch play. This is also the secondary effect of this card is very relevant, especially in a grind game scenario. It's useful to keep this, and then when you're shuffling back with the Tunneler, not shuffle back the Riverstormer, so that you can use one Infinitrack monster to be able to make a Riverstormer. Basically, you link the Infinitrack into Goliath, Riverstormer attributing to Goliath, bringing back the Riverstormer, and then heavy forward to put it into attack position so that you can steal a monster with Riverstormer. So then we get into Vernusylphs. We're playing one of the Awakening Forests. This card is really good, except it has to be normal or Slumber set. So you can't do Citadel, you can't do Ruin Force, which you wouldn't be able to do Ruin Force anyways, but you can't send Citadel, so it's not that big a deal. It's still nice to have, but it's only a one of, as the other two effects are much better. Flourishing Hills, this one adds a Vernusylph card, and also Vernusylph monsters can't be destroyed by card effects, which is sometimes relevant. And then Thawing Mountains here is the one that lets you draw a card. This one is probably the best one of the three, but the Vernusylph, so the Vernusylph of the Flourishing Hills is really good, because then you gain access to this card, which is one of the main reasons to play this engine, is the Flower Bud. So Flower Bud lets you target face-up cards your opponent controls up to the number of Earth monsters you control with different names that are special summoned from the graveyard, which obviously has incidental synergy with Earth Machine, because like Citadel special summons from the graveyard, Anger Knuckle brings back Bullet Train, usually Fortress special summons from the graveyard, or it can, and usually I do try to end with a Fortress that was special summoned from the graveyard, and then of course the Vernusylph special summon from the graveyard. Sometimes it's worth just making a Vernusylph of the Flourishing Hills, or like when you use the effect special summoning the Vernusylph, because it's got a big butt, 2000, can't be destroyed by card effects, and it guarantees that your Flower Bud goes through. And then, so it returns Earth monsters you control to hand equal to the number of targets, and if you do, return at least one to the hand. And if you return at least one, you return that targeted card to the hand. So you can return, like, I think in one of the replays, I was gonna return 3 cards, which is insane. And also, you don't have to return the Earth monster special summon from the extra deck. Obviously, if it's a Vernusylph monster, you usually would want to put it in hand so you can get the advantage from it. But if you wanted to, you could return like a Gear Frame special summon from the graveyard to hand, or something like that. So basically what you can do is, like, you could pitch Vernusylph of the Flowering Hills and a card that you've already used. Let's say you open 2 Gear Frame, bring the Gear Frame back, and then return it to your hand with Flower Bud, and you're basically just getting a free, because you're bouncing back one of your opponent's cards and then the Flower Buds. So that it's a free, like it's a +0 on the card advantage, and then you also have the Machine of Gear Frame still for next turn, so that's pretty good. 3 Solemn Strike. So instead of Solemn Strike, you could play Therion King Regulus. I think it might be worth exploring. When I was playing it, it was a little bricky and a little weird, and so I might want to play more Vernusylph, so maybe play 2 heavy forward instead of 3, and then maybe 1 or 2 Harvester, and then play more Vernusylph, more of this Vernusylph, so 3 of this Vernusylph, the Awakening Force, just because you need more ways to throw away that Regulus. Because you can, for example, like Vernusylph, throw away the Flourishing Hills and the Regulus, bring back the Regulus, and then you just have an Omni Negate, which is great. But sometimes it just gets stuck in your hand and then it's doing nothing. And obviously if you have other Machina combos, then you can do that too. But it's also kind of an expensive card, and I wanted to test a cheaper list, because this is a relatively cheap list. Nothing here is too expensive except for the skill drains. And probably you have skill drain if you're playing this deck anyways, or if you're playing any other control deck. So yeah. Skill drain, of course, nothing here really cares about it. Obviously, like, this is kind of the thing, you don't want to flip this, you don't love flipping this, but your monsters are very big and you can push through pretty much anything. And most of your effects activate in grave or field, or grave or hand, so including the Vernusylphs. So the Vernusylphs don't make this worse, they just make it better. Called by the Grave at 1, goes in match, everything's earth here except for the dark. This is another card that's really good this format against like Sprite. Against Tear Element, not so good, and so you would definitely side this out for a different card. But it's very good against Sprite, which is, I think, the worst matchup for control decks. I think control decks generally have a really hard time against Sprite, just because they have an on-demand spell trap negate. So I think goes in matches worth playing. But I mean, it is worth keeping in mind that, like, for example, like Enter Blacknir is a win, Zeus is a light, and Ruin Force, so your biggest main deck play, is a dark. And so you got to be mindful of when you activate this. You can't just flip this like in the draw phase and not care. The other thing too, I probably explained this before, but the Vernusylph cards here, when they after you resolve a Vernusylph effect, you can't activate anything except Earth monsters for the rest of the turn. And so one of the gameplay videos, I think, shows the interaction with that, where like you have a Vernusylph and an Infinitrack in hand, and then also an Unclasper, and so you end up having to normal the Unclasper, even though you could get the value off of special summoning it. Obviously not if it's already in your hand, but like you end up normaling the Unclasper to dump a Machina, just because like this effect can't be used after you do these effects, and so it feels kind of weird to normal that. But yeah. Then 3 Infinitrack Goliath, kind of an engine requirement for Infinitracks. Earth Slicer I really like because it's an Earth mass removal effect, so sometimes you need an Earth mass removal. And you can make it anytime you'd be able to make Enter Blacknir, so for example with Fortress and Harvester. And you, like I said, you do really need it sometimes because you have locked yourself into Earth with Vernusylphs. River Stormer, like for example, if you have a Fortress, you can do like Vernusylph the Awakening. If you open Harvester and Vernusylph the Awakening Forest and like Citadel, for example, you can do Awakening the Forest effect, pitching Harvester to send Fortress to the graveyard, and then use the Resolve the effect, bringing back Harvester to special summon it, and then activate its effect, and then Fortress effect, pitching Citadel, which will allow you to have a Fortress and a Harvester on field, and then you can then go into Earth Slicer, right? But then you're locked out of Enter Blacknir at that point because you used the Awakening Forest. Platinum Gadget, useful for special summoning, specifically Unclasper. I think it's not incredibly necessary. I think this is probably like the one flex spot here. Yeah, and then Cleave for Genius. Cleave for Genius is good into some boards, like into back row decks, but I don't love this card. I think if you were playing Urgent Schedule, Cleave for Genius would be better, but as this is more of like a control variant, and I think the Vernusylphs kind of take the place of Urgent Schedule's usefulness, and also like we're playing less level 10s, Cleave for Genius is less good. Ancient Gear Ballista is an engine requirement for the box, so you generally go into Ancient Gear Ballista at the end of your combo, add box, add Tunneler, Tribute, Ballista, use one of your extenders, as I mentioned before, to be able to make Anger Knuckle, putting the Tunneler in grave. Of course, you need to, at some point in your combo, cycle through 3 Goliaths, but that's just kind of how you have to do it with this deck. Anger Knuckle here, very good, just takes 2 general machines, so you can link off Unclasper into that if you happen to start with an Unclasper, for example. Gear Gigant X, very good, very necessary, because you basically, if you normal Gear Frame, you add Unclasper special summons itself because you added it outside of by drawing it. Then you can send one of your machinists to grave, overlay into Gear Gigant X. Gear Gigant X can add the Gearbox, and then Gearbox adds the Tunneler. And so, for example, if you sent the if you sent the Fortress off the Unclasper, then you can potentially have another extender too, depending on what you have in your hand. Like if you open 2 Gear Frame, then the box and the Gear Frame could be thrown away for a Fortress. Enter Blacknir is a really good removal tool. I think it's one of the only ways we have to banish cards out of the graveyard, which is necessary sometimes. It is a win though, so I think this might also be considered a flex spot, not entirely necessary. Gustav Max, Superdor, and Liba, these come up extremely infrequently. So I would say probably all 6 of these are flex spots. I don't think you absolutely need them. I mean, in past versions where they were more heavily focused on the level 10 trains, these 3 were necessary because you could very commonly make a super door turn 1 just to have something on field, like some sort of field presence with the 4,000 body. But I just don't think it's necessary nowadays. Maybe I would try moving in like an Iron Wolf or the rank 4 battleship that can rank up into Zeus, or just other generic, maybe another copy of Green X. Other Link monsters besides that. Yep, so that's it for the extra deck. In the side, I think Dark Ruler is really good. Into most boards, Solemn Strike Skill Drain or Solemn Strike Goes a Match or Solemn Strike Citadel is enough, or like Skill Drain Goes a Match, like all of that is enough to be able to break a board going second. Into Splight, it's not. And so Dark Ruler No More is going to have to come in for that matchup, and I think you'd probably do that over the Solemn Strikes. Dimensional Barrier and Anti-Spell here are meant to go in over the Goes and Match, so I would probably take out one Skill Drain and the Goes and Matches for these 4 cards. Evenly matched for counter back row matchups. Generally, your back row matchup is not great. It's not awful though, just because you don't really have it. It's not like Eldlich where you have like something that can pop floodgates that are bad, or other face-up spells like Conquistador of the Golden Land in Eldlich. But evenly match is pretty good to deal with things like that, especially because you don't care about your battle phase. You're not going to OTK most likely anyways, going second. And then Interrupted Kaiju Slumber and the Star Destroying Kaiju and the Sea Turtle Kaiju. Of course, these are the 2 targets you're going to play for this. I'm testing this out. I think this might be a good package because you could put this in over Goes and Match and then 2 Skill Drains, or Goes and Match, 1 Heavy Forward, 1 Harvester. And it could just help clear some like really monster heavy boards like Adamantipator against Sword Soul. You can probably bait out an interaction and then Kaiju Slumber, because you don't really mind Kaiju Slumbering your own monsters, right? Like, if you Kaiju Slumber a Citadel, that's just great, right? Or I'm not a Citadel. If you Kaiju Slumber you normal Gear Frame, and then your Gear Frame gets impermed, right? Kaiju Slumber the board, and then you can treat your own Citadel, something like that, right? And then Jizukiru is a choice because it's a machine, Gamma Seal just because it's the lowest attack one. So yeah, so that is the deck list. This is what I was playing in the videos, which I will show now, and I will run through some, I'll break down some of the videos and talk some of the combos I want to show off. Clap, clap, clap. Okay, so this is the first video. It is against Labyrinth, and I want to show this video because this was one of the first videos I took while playing this deck, while practicing with it for this video, and there is a pretty blatant misplay, so that's one of the best reasons I want to show this. So they do their stove. Obviously, I'm going first, so this is their stove effect. This deck is very interesting. To send a card from hand or field to graveyard and discard 1 card. So they discarded the Backjack, which is an interesting combo because then they mill the Dogmatic Punishment here to be able to use it this turn. To set a Labyrinth spell trap. So they set Welcome Labyrinth, of course, to get everything going because it can special summon the big boss. I begin with the heavy forward. And so this is where I should have done Vernusylph Pitch Harvester, because Vernusylph Pitch Harvester is really good here. Or actually, I think I start with Redeployment. No, I start with Vernusylph Pitch Derrick Rain, which there's no reason to do this at all. Oh, and this wasn't older build playing Corolla. I tried this out. This card's interesting, but I don't think it's worth playing unless you're playing a significantly bigger Vernusylph package. So for one, I should have added Flowering Buds or another. In fact, I probably should have added the Foolish Burial one. I think I thought that it didn't matter. I wanted to save the redeployment to pitch Gear Frame with it so that I could add the trap too, but that's just not correct. This card is nice because, so the benefit of Corolla into this matchup is in a deck like this, Labyrinth. So the reason that I added Corolla here, I think, was because Labyrinth, its main gimmick is that it gets benefits from using trap cards that remove cards from the field. So I figured there'd be a punishment, for an example, or things like that. And Corolla it makes all Earth machines on field, or all Earth monsters on field, into Vernusylphs, and then Flourishing Hills protects Corolla from, or it protects Vernusylph monsters from card effects. And so now anything I put on the field that's Earth will not be able to be destroyed by punishment, which I don't think my opponent realized. So maybe that was the reason that I didn't pitch Harvester, because if I pitched Harvester here with Vernusylph of the Flowering Hills, the decision probably would have still have been to get Vernusylph of the Flowering Hills. Probably the play here, I don't know, let's see what I do. So I did pitch Gear Frame, so I guess I did want to think about adding the trap here, but then I didn't add the trap anyways because I realized I needed bodies. So then I hit Fortress. Of course, now he's gonna try punishmenting this. Doesn't make any sense. And then he tried to Entis it, which of course lets me rip a card from his hand, and it still doesn't pop it because of the Flourishing Hills. So this opponent obviously doesn't really know what the Vernusylphs do, which is fair, they're new. Harvester to add Brittledozer, and see then at that moment that's just full combo. That's actually lethal in that moment because you can do quite a bit with this hand because you can get into a bunch of Earth Machines. Yeah, I think that's probably lethal. Well, maybe not lethal through this card. So I think this was game 1, through the Welcome Labyrinth, I mean. So I think this was game 1, and then game 2 and game 3. I think I did end up winning game 2, so I beat 1-2-0. But yeah, so that just kind of shows like the flexibility of the Vernusylph cards here. So now we will go on to the next replay. Okay, so this is the next replay. I don't just want to show replays where I win, of course. This is a match where I lose, and I think it'll be useful to talk through the problems I think I had when playing this. So this is kind of a weird hand. Obviously, no Vernusylph cards, no Infinite Draft cards, so I'm just relying on the Machina engine. 2 Solemn Strikes is very good in general, but you'll see in this matchup it's not. So I pretty much have to start with Gear Frame here, and then I want to put the Derricrane on field just as an extender. This is just the easiest time to do it. Add Unclasper, Special Unclasper. This is like bread and butter, except it's a little weird. So send Citadel here because I have the Fortress in hand already. Well, that doesn't really make much sense, right? Like having this Fortress in hand, sending Citadel. But just to put Citadel in graveyard, like when you draw Fortress like this, there's no reason to, there's not really a good send target when you have no other extenders. So Gear Gigant X, detaching Citadel to add the box, and the box add Tunneler, as I said. Tunneler tributing the Gear Gigant X, which puts 2 monsters in the grave. Now I can do, I make the Infinite Draft Goliath, and then I bring back the Fortress, and then I link into an Anger Knuckle, right? So then this puts, at least 5 in the grave, which is good. I was trying to draw into anything, like a Vernusylph card, anything. And so I think I'm going to put back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because I can't put back the Unclasper because this is only Earth Machines. Yeah. And then I draw redeployment called by, so at least with the redeployment I can pitch the called by, which I figured I didn't really need because the Solemn Strike would pretty much do anything that called by would do too. And Solemn Strike is more generic than called by, so I held onto the Solemn Strike instead. And then I can put another, look like I can put another Ruin Force in the grave, which against some matchups is good, and probably was a good play here, like adding these 2 was a good play. Probably the Unclasper just should not have sent the Citadel to begin with, because then I could have added Overdrive instead. Well, no, I couldn't have added Overdrive. So actually this maybe was the best play. So then I'm going to sit, but I remember even when I was doing this, like when I was doing this play live, like this felt really dumb, like double Fortress, Anger Knuckle, like what is that going to accomplish? And as you find out, it doesn't accomplish anything. So there's no level 10s in the grave to be able to bring back off of Anger Knuckle. So when I see this, I'm like, okay, it's either like discount Flu or Eldlich. And it was Eldlich, which is a very bad matchup for this deck. These Solemn Strikes don't do anything. He sends this. Obviously, if there had been a level 10 in my grave, I would have liked to have sent Anger Knuckle last turn so that I could send the Solemn Strike in this case and get some value off the Solemn Strike. But nope. And then I have to strike this Eldlich effect here. He tries to follow on Albaz, pitching a Rivalry. I'm like, well, surely he can go into, I know he has 2 targets here. He either has Mirror Jade or Titaniclad, and I don't want my machine monsters banished. It's kind of like the bane of Machina. So I send the Anger Knuckle so that he can't fuse with it. For Citadel, he has to do Titaniclad. He clears my board, doesn't read that Machina Fortress. Maybe he does, and that's all he can do anyways. It doesn't end up mattering. He still ends up, spoiler, winning, but Fortress can now pop the Titaniclad, because it's only protected by Special Summon monster effect, from Special Summon monster effects. And this was in the grave. That brings back the Citadel. Well, no, so the only target for Anger Knuckle was Citadel, and I didn't want him to be able to get a Mirror Jade, so having to bring back the Citadel negated kind of feels bad. At least now, I can send it to the graveyard for free. So Vernusylph was a really bad draw here, to be fair, but also I'm just in a bad position here, because he's got Elixir, Conch, Hawk Arrow, and then I think one other card I don't even end up seeing. So Anger Knuckle to send the Citadel so that I could bring back Ruin Force. Not to bring back Ruin Force, but just in case he did exactly this, right? I didn't want him to banish the Ruin Force. So like Citadel is a juicier target. Conk popping the Ruin Force. Ruin Force brings back the Citadel. I don't know why this says this is negated, because it's not negated. Oh, maybe because it hits the field. Then I can clear his field and bring back the Ruin Force again. But then here, now he can just, you know, bring back Hakero, do this, and then just go straight into Mirror Jade, which is like awful, right? Because the Mirror Jade just outs Machine of Ruin Force, and then I just lose here. And so I end up surrendering, yeah, because he just, I mean, once he banishes this. I mean, I wish this said when it leaves the field. It would make this card so much better. Machina would still be, like, rogue at best, like it is now, right? But, like, yeah. Anyway, so he banishes that. So misplays, but also I think this hand was just really not going to be good against Eldlich. So I guess it shows a bad matchup for this deck. So maybe it is worth citing instead of the Kaiju Slumbers. So, like, for example, into this board, Kaiju Slumber clears this whole board going second. But yeah, so that's it for the second replay. Okay, so I think this will be our last replay for this video. So this is a really good game against quote-unquote meta. At time of recording, I just watched a Hakuna Matata video talking about board breakers, and he showed a pie chart of the topping list for the last weekend's regionals. Obviously, we've already talked about Sprite, and that was the most prolific winner, but the next most was Branded Despia, and this is a match against Branded Despia. So this also shows off here heavy forward Vernusylph, so heavy forward for Harvester, and now we have 2 normal summons, which is the problem with this deck, right, is you have 2 normal summons that let you access 2 parts of the engines. But here we can actually use both of these because we have a Vernusylph monster. Any would work, but this is the best one to open in this situation. So we start the turn by using Vernusylph. It sucks that we have to do it this way because now, maybe we could have started with Gear Frame, and maybe it would have been better to start with Gear Frame because then we could have gotten the value off of the Unclasper, because once we've activated this effect, the Unclasper doesn't do anything. It can't activate because of the limitation, cannot activate non-Earth monster effects. But so, yeah, so the Vernusylph adds the Flower Buds, of course, and then Harvester, special summon back, triggers its effect. Adds Brutal Dozer tributes itself, brings out Trencher, and then this is just regular Infinite Track combo. So of course we tribute it for the Goliath, or link it for the Goliath, bring it back, link for Goliath, just so we can cycle 2 cards. And so in this instance, Machine of Gear Frame actually kind of acts as the quote-unquote extender that I was talking about for the combo that we needed. And then this also lets us protect Trencher. So here, because we have a fortress here. How did I get this? Oh, I added the fortress off the River Stormer. So I sent the fortress to the graveyard. I guess maybe we could have added it to hand too, but it doesn't matter because... Oh, well, this is actually better because by sending it to the graveyard, it's a monster that's been special summoned from the graveyard, and so Flower Buds can use it as material. So Gear Frame adds Citadel, pitch... Or so Ballista here. And then I believe box for Tunneler tributing that, link off into Goliath. Yes, I use the Trencher here because I want this fortress to be part of my end board. And then here I make Anger Knuckle and then Tunneler, shuffling back, of course, the correct targets. I've been liking leaving River Stormer here, and the reason for that is because with the Vernusylph monsters and with the Vernusylph monster specifically, you can bring back a Harvester very easily and then link it off for Goliath and then get the River Stormer in rotation without having to go through the whole combo and be susceptible to nib. So shuffle back and I draw Brutal Dozer, which sucks, and then another Vernusylph card. So the Vernusylph card I think is worth using, pitching the box just to get this engraved, to get some follow-up, which is really good because then we can normal the Harvester, right, on the next turn when we add this back. And then when we normal the Harvester, we can link it off for the Goliath, like use its effect to add, I don't think we actually have any targets at this point. I think we have, yeah, we don't have any targets at this point, but we can link it off and then bring back, which is even better, right? Because we have no targets, link it off, bring back the River Stormer without having to use the Brutal Dozer in hand. So in this situation, we bring back, so not only do we get to send the Bullet Train, right? We get to also bring back the Gear Frame, which is another Flower Bud bounce. Then we bring back the Fortress, we're pitching the Citadel, we set the Strike, the Skill Drain, and the Vernusylph. So now we've got 2 bounces. On the next turn, a 3rd bounce. Right now we're adding back the Harvester, I believe. And then we've got a Solemn Strike, a Skill Drain, and a bounce 3, which is insane. I mean, it is a targeted bounce 3, which is not amazing, but it could be better if it was not targeted. But Still not bad. At least it doesn't target the monsters that you're returning to hand. And you only have to at least return one of them. So if you destroy the other ones or something like that. Like if you overdrive, you target, let's say you in a situation we have got 2, right? So if we target 2 targets and then we overdrive one of them, we just return the last one to hand, that triggers Citadel. So that would be pretty good. We don't have overdrive, so it doesn't matter. But so they pitch Beast here, so they're not, or so they will draw a card. I chain Anger Knuckle to, I should have changed it to the other one, but Anger Knuckle bringing back the Bullet Train. Patchwork here. So this is I mean, Skill Drain does a lot of heavy lifting in this matchup, but we also don't super want to activate it because we want our Citadel to be live, because Citadel also does a lot of heavy lifting here, and also River Stormer on the next turn. So we're going to try and avoid using this. We want to use Solemn Strike and Flower Bud. And it is kind of weird, right, like leaving this gear frame here. Because gear frame, typically you would equip it to the Fortress, but because of Flower Bud, it's much better to have this here. So I actually do flip the Skill Drain here just because Aluber kind of forces it out. Like, I don't want to strike the Aluber. It's not very good value, especially when there's monsters in Grave that can activate. Yeah. So Poly for Masquerade, because they realize there's not much they can do under Skill Drain. Edge Imp Chain. I probably still would have gone to the Guardian Chimera here. I don't know what I would have done, to be honest. They pop the Bullet Train, which is fine, obviously, because then that brings back our Citadel, which, it's worth saying that, like, you'd think you lose a bounce here, but because Citadel just comes right back, we then also have a third bounce here, too. So, and then if we end up having to return these 2 back to our hand, we can just Fortress pitching Citadel, which is very good. And of course, we'll get the Bullet Train add back in the end phase, too. So they make the Citadel, or they make that, doesn't do anything, but they just want to set the Branded in red, which is a little bit scary because it allows them to dodge Skill Drain. So, like, if they Branded in red, like if they activate Mirror Jade effect or another monster's effect, chain Branded in red, banishing it, it will resolve and it could clear the Skill Drain. So it's worth thinking about that. And so when I was doing this, I was worried that they actually had a Branded in red in hand. And so I was thinking, like, if they chain Branded in red, I'm going to Vernusylph, return this back to the extra deck or something like that, right? Yeah, so then they just pass to me here. I draw Harvester, which is just a super dead draw, because now that's, I mean, the Harvester already had no target, but then I showcase here why leaving the River Stormer is good, because I can bring it back, attach it, heavy forward, putting in attack position, heavy forward send for Anger Knuckle, and then this right here was actually lethal, but there was, like, no way I could have known it. Well, I could have known it, I guess, but it was a really tricky line to see. So I clear it with Citadel, right? He activates this. I decide to strike here because if I don't have lethal, which at this moment I didn't think I did, and I didn't realize until later that I actually do have lethal, I don't want to lose my whole board because my board presence under Skill Drain is what's allowing me to put a lot of pressure on him this game. So I strike that effect. He goes to attack. See, if I had attacked with Fortress here, I had lethal. But I also didn't know what this back row was at the time. I do know, obviously, now talking to you, because I remember this game. I didn't know what this was, and so I decided to go in. I decided to not continue the attack with River Stormer, and I should have, and I attacked with Fortress. I should have continued the attack with River Stormer, or have attacked with Fortress first. Realized that there was a Masquerade in the graveyard and attacked with Fortress first. Because now this trade allows me to pop the face down, and trigger Citadel. And so the face down here is Banded Banishment, which was dead in this matchup anyways. He adds back the Branded in red and then doesn't summon because I don't think he has enough in hand, and even if he did have enough in hand, I could have returned monsters to be able to return it to hand. So I'm very certain that attacking the Fortress first would have been lethal, because that's another 3,000, 18, 15, and then the 25 would have been lethal. He polys, I chain to bring back the Bullet Train. Just better to have the Bullet Train in this situation anyways. Lubellion, and then they realize the writing is on the wall. I mean, if they try to make any push, I just return 3 to hand, and then I have a play that lets me, I can return Gear Frame, Citadel, Bullet Train to hand. Actually, yeah, I literally can return 4 to hand, so I have a bounce 4 at this point, and then, like, I wait till they go to battle phase and bounce 4, and then I have follow-up in bringing back a Fortress, Gear Frame effect to add a Ruin Force, or add the Unclasper pitch, Ruin Force, and then Ruin Force. So this is a very good situation to be in. Like, this plus this is a really hard thing to play through. But yeah, so this is probably the best showcase of what the deck can do, and it shows how useful the Vernusylph cards are for this engine. So yeah, so that's the last video. I'll pass you back over to the deck list again for final thoughts and a debrief. Okay, so that's the deck. I hope you liked it and thought it was interesting. I think these Vernusylph monsters have a very interesting interaction going forward, and every time a new Earth archetype is released, it's going to be interesting to see how these interact with it. I think also the new Vernusylph cards that come out in Darkwing Blast are going to help with this too. And I think there's also something to be said for changing the ratios around. I feel like Metal Cruncher, maybe playing Third Round King Regulus, things like that could make this deck a lot better. So if you have any ideas, any comments, make sure to leave them below. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, it helps a lot. I'm trying to post a lot more regularly. I think I'm going to try and hit Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday every single week, different videos. If you have any ideas for videos, leave them below. And follow me on Twitter at morphingjars. Thanks, and I hope you liked it.